public. We have to engage the public. We need compliance and participation from the public in order to have favorable outcomes. And so that's why that piece is built right into our mission statement. Below our mission statement there is the waste hierarchy, which is something that we live by. It's in Maine state statute. It's also in several other state statutes across the country. And it's also guidance from the Environmental Protection Agency. So something that we all follow very closely, and that is the waste hierarchy, which starts with reduce and then reuse, recycle, compost and digestion, waste to energy, and then landfill. That blueprint seems so simple, but really, and it is simple, but the challenge that we've always had with this hierarchy that's been around for quite some time, it's been around since the garbage days, is that it's not fully executed. And so our hope by doing presentations such as the one we're doing today, and I thank you for this opportunity, but also out in the schools and with all types of groups, we're hoping to get the word out on how important this policy is and how we can move toward executing better policy when it comes to solid waste management. This is what our service area looks like. So here again, 70 member communities, about just under 500,000 people we serve. And we go as far south as just over the border into Newington and Greenland. And then all the up north to Reedville and Waterville and Liberty and over to Lemoyne and west to Freiburg. So we really cover a lot of ground. We don't have all the communities. We are a regional agency. You join this regional effort because you want to as a community. Other towns and cities have joined other regional agencies. Some have gone it on their own. But this is our member communities who have decided that they want to be a part of this organization, which again is community owned and operated. We have several facilities and programs that we focus on. First and foremost is our single sort recycling facility. We started single sort 15 years ago as a way to make collection at the curb more efficient. When we used to do 7 sorts at the curb, and if you can imagine, when the truck had to do 7 sorts at the curb in front of everybody's house, the truck was there for several minutes on each stop. The truck was running for several minutes in front of each person's home. And as we added more and more communities, it became more and more evident that we needed a more efficient way to collect materials. We couldn't let these trucks idle in front of everybody's home for minutes on end while we did all the sorting and separating at the curb. And so that really was the transition to single sort recycling, which basically moved from several minutes per stop to enable us to do a stop in about 8 seconds. So those communities that have transitioned to fully automated systems now can basically stop in front of a home and in 8 seconds can dump that material fully in a fully automated system. We're not totally there yet, but many of our communities have fully automated recovery now, and then move on to the next home. So you can see the efficiency there. By example, the city of Portland, when we moved from at that time we were on a 2 sort system to a single sort system, they were able to cut their fleet size in recycling collection vehicles in half. So that was huge, and that's what made single sort recycling so popular across North America and really in the world, over the world, is being able to collect much more efficiently and having a less environmental footprint inside our communities. We also have a food waste recovery project where we've partnered with organizations that collect food waste and then also process food waste, in this case, through anaerobic digestion. We have a waste to energy plant, again, that's located in Portland. And then we also have we have a landfill and a Nashville located in South Portland and in the town of Scarborough. Our programs are numerous, including tours and school presentations, grants, plenty of outreach. We focus on earned media as well as paid media, social and digital media, fairs and events. And obviously this year, over the past year, we've had to transition to virtual efforts, which have worked quite well for us. Two certifications that we are very proud of. The first on top there is our ISO 45001 certification. This is proof of our safety performance. And I can't tell you, of all the things in my 30 plus years in the industry, this rigorous certification has improved our safety awareness considerably. And please pass the word around because I can't say enough about this program. It really focuses on safety, keeps our employees safe, but also keeps our communities safe. So it's a win-win for both our employees as well as our communities in keeping our operations as safe as possible. And then we are also certified in ISO 14001, which is our environmental record. And that too has served our organization quite well. These audits take place twice a year and really make sure that we're crossing every T, dotting every I, and that we don't lose sight of these two very important organizational priorities that we don't want to ever let end up on the back burner. So moving toward recycling and how it's been impacted over the last couple of years, I just want to kind of set the stage because before COVID hit about a year ago, we were in a major crisis when it came to recyclable materials that really set the stage for how we were going to be able to respond really with or without COVID. What happened was that recycling saw exponential growth from about 1990 all the way well into the 2000s. It was just, I mean, I was amazed. I remember when we were trying to sell communities to recycling back in the late 80s and in the early 90s. And, people would laugh at us, at some of the town meetings and, nobody's going to use your little blue bin for recyclable materials. It's, people aren't going to participate. But what we found was people really wanted to participate. I mean, we saw participation rates from households, of 80, 90% right out of the starting gate. And you don't see that with many other programs that we experience in life. Certainly not the speed limit. So, the compliance, the participation, the volunteerism was huge. No other landfill diversion waste management strategy has been more effective at diverting materials away from landfills than recycling has been. There's nothing that even compares to it, not even close. So recycling has served us well, and it continues to serve us well. However, we have to recognize that it is a commodities market. It is a market-driven activity that's just like the stock market. You're in it for the long haul. If you're in it for the short haul, it's a huge mistake. But over the long term, it has served us quite well. But it is going to see cycles. And historically, we've seen the recycling industry, because recycling was around far before 1990, as many of you may know. But it became fashionable at the curbside, particularly in the early 90s and into just 2000 or so. So that's where we saw this upward curve. And as supply increased, demand, we kind of forced almost by having the supply side focus, we forced the demand side to come on board, and that happened. There were some risks associated with that, I think, but it happened. And once paper mills realized that there was this huge amount of raw material on the market that they could capture, they made the investments to make paper out of paper, to make plastic bottles out of recycled plastic, to make glass out of glass. So that really happened, and it happened quite nicely for us. And then we saw some ups and downs in the market. And then about 3 years ago, we saw this extreme fall in the market, huge. And, we had been averaging close to, $100 a ton for quite some time. And we got used to that. And then it fell right out from underneath us, where it was no longer a sustainable model, financially speaking. At $15 a ton, it doesn't pay for the costs of collection nor processing, let alone the public education you got to do with these programs. So why did this happen? Well, the biggest factor here was supply and demand fell out of balance because China, who was the largest importer of recyclable material in the world, whether you were in North America, whether you were in Sweden, it didn't matter where you were, the majority of the material was shipped to China. And they became the world's recycler. And when they stopped buying material, they developed policy that took about 10 years, and we saw this coming. We probably should have been more prepared, but it lasted for quite some time, and the industry really didn't react until China closed their border to the importation of recycled materials. When they stopped buying, it threw supply and demand out of balance. Supply went way up, and the demand wasn't there to pick it up. But what also happened was the recyclable material mix changed. In 1990, 95% of what we collected was something that you may never have heard of, and that is newspapers. Newspapers dominated the recycling programs, really across the world when they first started. And over the last 5 to 10 years, they've all but disappeared. There's only a few subscribers left. And those that do subscribe, the paper is tiny. I mean, it's this thick. And so there's just no fiber there. And so we used to sell all of our paper right here in Maine. All of it went to Maine mills. But when the newspaper market fell out and we weren't producing newspapers anymore, then China was there to pick up the pieces. And so that really did change the market. So pre-2018, most of the fiber material was headed for China from the state of Maine, but really across the world. And then that since has changed as China stopped buying. The movement, India was there to pick up a lot of the pieces, but so was a lot of the other Asian countries there, Afghanistan and Vietnam and Taiwan. And I mean, there were just lots and lots of other countries that picked up some of the pieces, but not to they did not have the appetite or the consumption to fulfill what China was buying prior to that. But what we've also seen in the industry is a huge interest and investment into domestic markets. So over the last 3 years, 20 mills have announced mill transitions or expansions right here in North America, to being right here in Maine, which we're quite happy with. ND Paper, or more formally known as Nine Dragons, they purchased 2 Maine mills, one in Rumford and one in Old Town, as a way to transition to the paper bans that the Chinese government put into place. So they couldn't import raw recycled fiber, but if we recycled the fiber here domestically into recycled pulp, there was no ban on recycled pulp. So the mills who were still starving and are still starving for material in China, they can import recycled pulp. It just has to be made here in North America. So you're seeing a huge transition here in North America on a lot of our mills, which has provided some opportunities for these mills to have a second life. What's happening in the industry is that these mills are moving away from making paper, the traditional paper that the graphics paper, the copy paper, the computer paper, that has long gone, the newspapers, the magazines. They're transitioning away from paper And these mills are now making packaging out of fiber. And they're weighing that the consumer will prefer paper packaging over plastic packaging. And so that tells me that that paper will still have a place in our economy when it comes to the packaging industry going forward. I think these people, when they make these millions and millions of dollars of investments, and sometimes it's hundreds of millions of dollars of investments, I believe that they know what they're doing. And I believe that the consumer has an interest, at least for some applications, on paper packaging. An example of that is cereal boxes. How many of you prefer a bag of cereal as opposed to a box of cereal? Now there's a bag and a box, I realize that, but most people are still grabbing for the box and not the bag. By comparison, remember when laundry detergent was a powder in a box? Well, now you can't find powder in a box, barely. And so that transition was into a plastic jug. And so people like the plastic jug, the consumer liked the plastic jug for that particular application. And now we're seeing a transition from the plastic jug to a pouch. And we're seeing that, which is right now not recyclable. So that's a challenge that the recycling industry has right now that we're dealing with. But this transition here is intriguing, and we're following it quite closely. So then COVID hits, and that presents us, we've already experienced over the last 3 years this huge shift in the recycling markets. Recycling programs are kind of hanging on, just at the end of the rope, and then COVID hits. Now, when COVID hit for us, we kind of wondered, my job description changed, 100%, as many of your job descriptions, I'm sure, changed 100%. And suddenly I became the COVID manager here at ecomaine. And so I called the CDC, which I had never had in my 30-year career. I've never had to do before. But I called them and I said, hey, look, I know a whole lot about waste management, but I don't have a clue about a pandemic. And even in our emergency and contingency plan, there was no mention of a pandemic. So I didn't have anything in our resources that I could turn to. But on March 7th of 2020, when I reached out to the CDC, they provided an enormous amount of help and assistance to us. Basically, what I told them is, I can't close. If I close, all we're going to do is create another health issue for our member communities. I mean, you can't stop collecting trash from the hospitals. You can't stop collecting trash from businesses and grocery stores. I mean, a resident might be able to hang onto their trash for a few weeks, but even that's going to present a problem. So I said, I can't close. How do I stay open? And that's when they said, well, you've got to keep your workers 6 feet apart. You've got to mask up, and you've got to document, and you've got to be able to manage your own contact tracing, which again, I never heard of that either. And so we began last March of managing our own contract tracing. So we documented every single close encounter. If you were with another person within 6 feet, you were required to write it down for more than 15 seconds. Now, the CDC recommended at the time 15 minutes, but we used 15 seconds because I didn't want to include the passing in the hallway. But if you had a conversation with somebody, we wanted to include it if it lasted more than 15 seconds. So documenting it got everybody into a really, really good habit of understanding and being aware of when you have these close encounters. So that was really, really helpful. And there were circumstances where we couldn't stay apart. Two mechanics working on a job, and they needed 2 people to turn those wrenches. But we had the PPE, and we already had the PPE to keep ourselves safe. So we've been able to manage through it, and we're still here, we're still open. We've obviously had challenges like everybody else. But for me, from my perspective, the bigger challenge was really this supply chain. because what happened was the supply chain began to buckle as the articles came out without really people, these were the unintended consequences of the municipalities and really the commercial sector too, businesses abandoning their recycling programs because it was just too difficult to conduct these programs during a pandemic. So you saw some big cities like Baltimore and Philadelphia and El Paso, Texas. I mean, it was, who just suspended their recycling programs, and suddenly the supply dried up. And so we convinced our communities, look, whatever you do, this is not the time to suspend your recycling collection. We need that material. The mills are calling for it. The mills are panicking that they may not have the supply to fulfill the orders that they need. Now, a lot of municipalities had to do it. In fact, some municipalities haven't been able to return. Some of that is because they don't have the help. I know Philadelphia has been struggling with just finding the people, the truck drivers and the collectors to fill those positions. And so they've been struggling with that aspect of it. What also happened, as everybody knows, was this working from home. And so when the businesses closed up and closed their doors, the majority of the material of recyclable materials, believe it or not, was actually collected in the commercial and an industrial sector. And when that dried up and almost entirely just kind of disappeared, all this material, all these boxes, all this packaging ended up at the home. And it was, in some cases, a little bit different. So when you think of, a department store who's just got boxes and boxes of boxes, I mean, everything comes into in a box and ends up at the department store. And then when they're undoing the, breaking the bulk and undoing the packages, they'll just have tons and tons and tons of cardboard boxes. And they're clean cardboard boxes. They have no contamination because they never reach the consumer. Once recyclable reaches the consumer, we call it post-consumer recyclable material. And that tends to have a lot more contamination in it than pre-consumer recyclable material, which is ultra clean because the consumer has never touched it. The consumer has a lot of other recyclables, and that's what often contaminates the stream. And they may not have the people on staff who are fully, understanding the recycling process. And so the material just naturally is just not as pure as it is as compared to coming in from the commercial side. So that was another change that we had to deal with here in the recycling industry. But 40 to 50% of everyday goods need recycling to happen. Who would have thought that almost half is reliant on some sort of recycling, whether it's the metal or aluminum in cars, or the paper products, or the packaging, or even the clothing. All of that is reliant on recycled products. And the big one is, now that there's home delivery, and I think everybody's getting a box, almost regularly, if it's not weekly, it's turned into daily, on their front step. And that's reliant on the consumer participating in these recycling programs. If they don't have this, you won't get that. And particularly with the commercial sector down so much on their volumes, obviously that's come back some. That was a real problem in the early stages of COVID. So then COVID moves along, and from March until July, obviously we experienced huge shortages. But we also experienced, we didn't have any kind of recovery in the market. The market really lagged behind. And I think that was somewhat due to the uncertainty. Nobody knew exactly what was going to happen here. But once July came, then we saw this huge transition to a positive market. Now, this is the value of what we call mixed paper. So this is going to be your cereal boxes and your junk mail and your just mixed paper in general versus cardboard boxes, which is down here. 174% increase in the last 7 months. So you can see when supply dried up, what that did to demand. So that was huge. Why was it negative? Because we had to get it to market. And if your market's in India, transportation is pretty expensive. We have another market in West Virginia. And so our hope is that we will eventually return to markets in New England, or for that matter, Maine. We're hopeful that those announcements in Rumford of the mill expansions and the conversions and in Old Town, that we will someday come back to keeping our paper right here in Maine. And that would be the most sustainable model going forward. And then you can see cardboard prices, again, increasing 63%. So this is all positive news, I think, for the recycling industry. And I think it's also because of the infrastructure that is being made, the investments in infrastructure right here in North America. And really, that's, to me, what's going to turn the tides with recycling. But we're not just seeing it with fiber, we're seeing it with metal prices as well. Both aluminum and steel are both up considerably in the last 7 months. Plastics are up considerably over the last 7 months. And so we expect, and all indications that I'm reading are that this trend will continue. What'll stop it in its tracks, obviously, is a recession. So this industry follows, the economy. And so if we do have a recession, or I shouldn't say if we have a recession, when we have a recession and when the recession hits and how bad that recession is, that'll have, that could really bring us to a screeching halt when it comes to these commodities markets. But we'll take the markets while they're there. So I think I was really pleased to hear Lucinda White mention the overlap in our goals, and I never really took the time to fully appreciate and understand that, and I'm kind of amazed how closely our goals are aligned. So I look forward to having further dialogue on that, and I worked with Tim Rubach a couple of years ago, working on his program, and I was amazed too how closely our goals were aligned with some of the things that that they are contemplating and discussing. And I'm particularly interested in space trash going forward, because that's not something that I've spent a whole lot of time on. Also wanted to mention just kind of what the industry is what's on the leading edge or cutting edge of the industry. And we do have a waste energy facility, and we've been selling our power for many years now, but the market for electricity has really been flat over the last 5 or 8 years. It's the electricity just isn't worth all that much. And so we came up with a program this year. We've actually had our pool cars have been fully electric for a number of years now, but they're light duty, but we plug them into the waste energy plant. They're charged by the power that the waste energy plant produces. And our fuel basically is trash. So these cars are powered by trash. We received a grant this year, and we have ordered our first all electric heavy duty trucks. So this will be a big transition for us. We haven't really seen heavy duty applications in the market. And this will be the first. And this will be the very first application of trucks that will actually be powered by the trash that these trucks are hauling. So it really comes full circle with this application. And you can see down here at this graph how it increases the value of the power that we generate sixfold. So rather than selling it for 3 cents a kilowatt hour, we'll be selling it for 18 cents a kilowatt hour when we consider the offset of the alternative fuel, which traditionally has been diesel fuel. We also are putting landfill on our landfill a solar array, a 5 megawatt project. And I think what makes this project particularly interesting is that we're using what would otherwise be non-usable land. And so we're really excited about that, and really a brownfield application for solar project. It won't be the first, and it's becoming more and more popular, but there's not much you can do with a landfill, because the landfill, you might have 30, 60, 100 feet of waste buried underneath the ground. And so it's an unstable environment down there. And you have settlement and everything else. You really can't dig, you can't protrude into the landfill. So whatever application you do has to be on top of the landfill surface. And so the solar array is perfect for this application. So this is going to be built. We have a contract in place, and hopefully will be built this summer, and we will be generating power a year from now. Public awareness. We really want to make sure that we, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, that we are reaching the young folks. Hey, Finn, can you come here a sec? And so today being a Saturday, I brought my 9-year-old into work, and he's, come on over here. Can you say hello to everybody? These are the folks that we want to reach. And so we want to reach them in the classroom, and we want to make sure that they are engaging in these programs as well as the adults in our communities. And so we have a whole team that has that our communities have invested in. Not all communities have done this, and I commend our member communities for investing in our communities and educating them to make sure that they're engaged in our programs. And that has worked out well. The return on investment, we feel, is huge here, because once we teach these people and educate them on good solid waste policy, they become our advocates and they spread the word for us. And so that has worked wonders in our member communities. And so we're in the schools on a regular basis. Obviously, over the last year, it's been virtual, but we have tours in person, again in virtual. We're tabling at events, and then we also do a lot of advocacy, both at the federal and the state level. And we're working some bills now to really improve solid waste policy across the board. And we're also in the communities on the curb. Actually, we use an intern program that was devised last year, where we do tagging programs. Green means you're doing a great job with recycling. Red means not so much. We need you to sort your recyclables better. So that has gotten a lot of public awareness and has proved quite well for us for that investment. But our objective here is to really move the needle when it comes to the waste hierarchy. Right now, the hierarchy is on its head. It's upside down. And we need better policy, better federal policy, better state policy, as well as local policy to turn this right side up, so that we are pushing the management of solid waste up the hierarchy as much as we possibly can. So thank you. So thank you for your attention today. I was excited to do this presentation, and I would be happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. That was terrific. Really, really enlightening. I am here to voice the questions of the audience, so please put your questions in the chat. In the meantime, I guess I will ask some of my own until some questions come through. One of them is, let's see, well, let's take the China question first, or the future of it all first, the big picture. So in your talk, you said that China was cutting demand. You kind of knew ahead of time it was going to happen, but then we should have been prepared. So I'm wondering what's coming next, and then who needs to be prepared, and how could we help?
Sure. We did see China coming for, we saw that whole issue coming for about a year. I mean, they weren't silent about it. They were fairly transparent about what their intentions were. I mean, they announced over a decade ago that they were not going to be the world's dumping ground for, in particular, contaminated recyclables. But the problem was that they paid a premium that nobody else was willing to pay. They had these containers that they were shipping goods, all around the world, right. And these containers were going back empty.
Right.
And so it was cheap transportation back to China. And so if you didn't have to pay for transportation, it was landing in China fairly cheaply. And they, on top of that, were paying a premium. So, back when I say, 10, 15 years ago, when we transitioned off of Maine mills, because those mills, our own mills, were closing, and some of this goes back 20 years ago, China was there to pick up the pieces. And not only were they there to pick up the pieces, they were willing to pay prices that the industry had never seen before. Not only were they willing to pay you good money, they were also not very picky about the level of contamination that were in the bales. So all of those things were like too good to be true. And like everything else in life, when something is too good to be true, it doesn't last. And so, I never thought for the life of me that it would take 10 or more years, but they bought for 10 or more years. And finally they put a stop to it. And I even questioned, because they tried to put a stop to it like 3 or 4 times before that. They had one effort called the Green Fence in 2014. They said no more. And then they said, oh, we were just kidding. And so they started buying again. So that I kind of thought that the national sword that they announced was another one of those tricky, policy changes. But this one was real. So I think that now that we know it's real, now that they stopped buying, we have seen tremendous infrastructure here in North America that is, I believe, going to make a difference. I actually believe that there's going to be a shortage of fiber now that newspapers are out of the mix. And now that some recycling programs have been suspended or have been canceled altogether. And so what we need to do is we need to reinvest in these recycling programs. Because recycling, when we devised these programs, 20 and 30 years ago, they weren't because anybody was going to make all this money off of it. I mean, that's why government got involved in the first place. It wasn't profitable. It was a landfill diversion strategy. Mm-hmm. And landfilling is not a sustainable waste management strategy. 1 million tons of waste was trucked or was taken by rail out of Massachusetts last year alone and shipped to Ohio. To me, that's crazy, and it's not sustainable. It's working right now because transportation is fairly cheap and landfilling in Ohio is cheap. But the last thing I want to have happen is for Southern New England trash to come north. And trash is going to go to the place of least resistance. That's the way the industry works. Mm-hmm. And so we need better policies here in Maine so that we don't become the place of least resistance. New Hampshire is in turmoil with trash. Half of the trash that's landfilled in New Hampshire comes from outside their state. We don't want to end up like that. And we're on the road, we're on that path. And so what I've really advocated at the state level is we need to turn the tide before we turn into a New Hampshire and start being, New England's dump for solid waste across the New England states.
Wow, thank you. Okay, I'm voicing the audience. What an incredible presentation, such great information. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
So a question from Lonnie. I noticed my community is not on your list. Why is it that some communities don't join? And then what priorities do you have for bills in the current legislature?
Sure. So I'll start with the latter question. So one of the bills that I think is really an important bill, we've been working on this for many, many legislative sessions. And my experience is, progress in the legislature sometimes comes slowly, but you have to be persistent. And we have been persistent. One of the bills is LD 57, and the last session it was LD 988. And that is, we need to disincentivize landfilling in the state of Maine. Other states have done this. Vermont has a landfill fee. If you're going to landfill in Vermont, you're going to pay a storage fee, $6 a ton. And that $6 goes into a fund to support incentives for the higher rungs of the hierarchy: reduce, reuse, recycling, composting, digestion. And Pennsylvania has done the same thing, being next to New York City. They don't want all of New York City's trash. And trash is a commodity. And by law, you cannot stop interstate commerce from happening. So it is going to cross state boundaries. And so you've got to put policies into place. So basically, Pennsylvania says, if you're going to bring trash into our state, then you're going to pay for it. And we need to do the same thing. We have in our state, we have a $2 landfill fee. It's not as good as Vermont, which is $6, but it's $2. The problem with that fee is that there's an exemption, a loophole, and nobody's paying it. So that's the problem is we need to fix that. And that's what LD 57 does. It doesn't solve the problem, but it gets rid of the loophole so that everybody starts paying, so that we can get that flow of revenue that we need to give back to municipalities and programs and businesses to support those higher rungs of the hierarchy, such as recycling. That's the only way we're going to get off landfilling.
Thank you. Besides paper, what can be most profitably recycled?
Well, aluminum is usually the most profitable of all the commodities. And so that's been a very positive market. We're seeing more and more material packaged in aluminum. I think the consumer is, it prefers a recyclable package that's readily recyclable. What's kind of amazing to me is the beer industry. Who'd have thought that quality beer would ever come in a can? And now, most quality beers, craft beers, what have you, comes in a can. And it's partly due to that the aluminum can is more readily recyclable than the glass bottle. I'm fairly critical of the glass industry. They have not done a good job at keeping that glass bottle front and center on the readily recyclable list. And they have really been on the sidelines versus, the aluminum industry and other industries have really marketed their package. Also, if you look at the milk jug, so most of us buy milk in a 1 gallon jug. It looks like a cloudy, it's called HDPE, high density polyethylene. That jug trades for, $1,200 a ton. 30 years when I got into the industry, it didn't have any value. So those markets have really improved. Those bottles are being made into new bottles, and it's easy to say that we want to get rid of plastic. I'd like to get rid of non-recyclable plastic. I'd like to get rid of the plastic that's ending up in our oceans and in gullies and streams. But plastic totally isn't going to go away. It has a purpose. I mean, I think COVID has shown us that we're going to need plastic going forward. The plastic garbage bag isn't going anywhere. People want to contain their trash. And so I don't see that being replaced by a paper bag like it used to be. I think plastic does have a purpose. I think my focus is, let's focus on the readily recyclable plastic that has infrastructure for collection and then has value in the marketplace.
Thank you. Could you sorry. I'm supposed to ask you to speak on the impacts on social inequality caused by recycling and sustainability.
Sure. I think, one of the things that we have really focused on to that subject is really focusing on recycling services in hard to reach communities. So often these recycling programs are really focused on communities with folks with a garage and 3 bedrooms and a driveway, and you roll your cart or your recycling bin to the end of the driveway, and everybody sees that you have your recycling bin out and everybody's happy. And so it's everything's good. But you go into some neighborhoods and, neighborhoods, where, a lot of times, they're more worried about how they're going to put food on the table, let alone, how to understand how to recycle it correctly in these programs. And so we went into some of these communities where we saw participation very low. And what we found was the bins weren't even labeled correctly, or, they only had directions in English, or nobody took the time to really get them to understand the benefits of these recycling programs. And so we did this over the last couple of years, and really focused on some of these areas to really move the needle on recycling and recycling participation and effectiveness. And we have the results, and I'd be happy to share them with you. I actually did a presentation to a legislative panel yesterday, and where I showed some of these slides, and we have these slides. But after this effort, after we made this effort to be in the community, on the streets, and provide incentives and education, and make sure that the directions were on the bins, and make sure they were in the right language for a lot of these communities, participation just took off. And we're really proud of that. And our outreach team, led by Matt Grondin, who's our communications manager, they've just done an outstanding job with those programs. So I'm proud of those programs. We've made a difference, and we could have forgotten those communities. But we didn't. Our communities, our board of directors was willing to make that investment. It wasn't free. We made that investment, and the return on that investment so far has been positive.
Thank you. So are you aware of any United Nations initiatives that are helping get more attention or support for the recycling industry?
Well, I'm glad I attended today's session, because I learned today about some of those initiatives. And I also learned that I've got some homework. No, haven't done a good enough job. And we're always looking for connections. We're connected. And I think there's opportunity there to become more connected. As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to connect with the schools as an industry. We're trying to connect to the schools. Not only are teaching how to recycle, something as simple as that, but also we have this initiative where we're reaching out to high school students. Just this week, we reached out. How do we connect with the guidance counselor in our high schools to let them know this industry exists? Because somebody's got to carry this industry into the future. And so we need the high school students to get into this industry, and we need to connect with the universities better. I'm president of the Northern New England chapter of the Solid Waste Association of North America, and we hold all our events at colleges or schools because we make it free for students. And again, that's to connect with the students and bring them into this industry that they may not really appreciate or know much about. The industry is huge, whether you're majoring in chemistry or biology or the social sciences or engineering, our discipline crosses all those disciplines. And so it's fairly unique, but it's not well known.
Thank you. One last question, although there are more, but I'm not going to be able to ask them all. So there's a question, I don't even know the truth of it. Is there any interest in increasing the use of cellophane, something that biodegrades better? I always thought the flimsy stuff was the stuff you were supposed to avoid.
Yeah, so we kind of put a lot of the flimsy stuff into a category called flexible packaging. And flexible packaging currently is a huge problem for the industry. And the industry has tried unsuccessfully, for the most part, to find a good solution for flexible packaging. Most notably, as I mentioned earlier, these are going to be your pouches. And 20 years ago, we didn't see pouches, flexible packaging on the store shelves that we see today. What's on the packaging is just so much different than it used to be. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, glass really is limited to pickles and vinegar now, and maybe a couple of oil bottles. and a few beer bottles, and once in a while wine. So wine comes in a box, it comes in a bag, it comes in, it comes in everything these days. So the flexible packaging is huge for this industry. We don't have a home for it. There have been some pilot programs out there that collect flexible packaging and have collected it separately, only to combust it at a waste energy facility, which we already have. So that really has been the extent of where that industry has gone. So no commercial viable solution yet. Although it is being worked on, but we need to move faster. The industry needs to move faster, and we've got a long way to go.
Last question, just, I said the other one was the last, but this is there a link for a listing of job opportunities?
Sure. So, well, from ecomaine standpoint,
Yeah.
we have, we have our own website where we post our jobs.
Okay.
SWANA, the Solid Waste Association of North America, has a website. Obviously, you can Google jobs and find a lot there. And people, we've even moved, Indeed and some of those other networks, LinkedIn, obviously those are real strong spots to find positions in this industry.
Thank you. So I'll pass it back to Lucinda White at this point. Thank you so much for your informative and inspiring talk.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
So thank you also. I was just amazed, and I think that the questions, the way you fielded those questions was great, and I appreciate that, and I will admit that we have not connected enough before, and I'm glad that you were with us today, and I hope that we continue to work together on many of these very important and common goals. And I want you to know that our chapter will be sending ecomaine a gift and a membership for you in our chapter for 2021. And we hope to keep up with you. And I would also encourage people, you mentioned the website. In preparing for this, spent a lot of time looking at the ecomaine website, and there is a tremendous amount of information there. There's kind of an encyclopedia. You can put in whatever your product is.
The recyclopedia.
Yes, yeah. So I hope people will do that. And I also would say, in terms of this membership in our chapter, I would encourage everyone else attending to look at our chapter website and join the chapter if you haven't. And you will find that you're getting information not just from us, but you will be deluged with information from the national office. And there are a lot of different initiatives. And because everything is virtual now, you can attend a program in Arizona or Chicago. And so there are tremendous opportunities for connecting. So now I'm